Dear Heavenly Father, we ask you today for the opportunity to be here and for each person that fills this room. We ask you to guide us in our efforts to make the best decisions on behalf of the district. Give us a desire to find ways to excel in our work and encourage others to be kind to each other and bring out the best of all of us gathered here today. We all have ideas, vision, talent and ability, and we ask you to guide our hearts and minds in the spirit of fairness, equality and speech, so that we may reach a successful and clear conclusion to the issues that are in front of us today. We ask this in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Welcome to this October meeting of the Council. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you are also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you have finished. Now, before I move on to the agenda, please can I remind members that an extraordinary meeting is being held immediately after this one, which I will need to formally open and then withdraw the item on the agenda. Therefore, I ask all members to remain in their seats after this meeting closes. I'll now move to the agenda, please. Part 1. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have not received any. Thank you.
Declaration of interest by councillors. Thank you. No declarations. Point 3. BC 1921 to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 24 September 2019 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy?
Thank you, Chairman. On page 12, item 8.5, it says the Cabinet Member for Economic Growth responded. He wasn't present. I responded on his behalf.
Thank you. Councillor Arthey, did you have a comment?
Thank you, yes. Page 14, 810, third paragraph. 811 attendances should read 881.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. So, any further comments or matters of accuracy? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As the Leader of the Council's brought it up, page 12, paragraph 8.5, it does state that the Cabinet Member who wasn't there, or the Leader acting on his behalf, responded and an answer will be circulated after the meeting. How long after the meeting are we to expect that response? Because I haven't seen anything yet.
So that will be chased up. Thank you. Hopefully that will be coming soon. Can we now vote for the amended minutes, please? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Osborne. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ward, thank you. All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. Item 4, BC 1922, announcements from the Chairman and Leader. I refer you to paper BC 1922 for noting. Thank you. Councillor Ward, have you anything to report?
I was not intending to, given that I didn't have time as a result of personal circumstances last week. However, I attended this morning the finance briefing on the business rates, and there weren't many people there. It is being rerun again tomorrow at 4:30, and I do highly recommend this. It's a very important and very complicated topic, and members do need to get their heads around it as much as they can. So, and it's a thoroughly good presentation by Melissa and Catherine, and I think as many people please as possible get along to it. It's well worth it.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. We'll move on now to item 5, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None have been received.
Item 6, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules. Questions received in accordance with council procedure rule 12. Mr. Lamming, would you like to come forward and ask your questions?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have 2 questions. The first is to ask the Leader of the Council. The undated report BC/19/20 from the Leader, renaming Babergh District Council, for consideration at an extraordinary meeting of the Council convened for 6:30 p.m. today, states at paragraph 3.1, quote, "It is proposed to change the name of the district from Babergh to South Suffolk, and that, quote, if the name is changed, the formal name of the council would be the District Council of South Suffolk, though it will usually be rendered as South Suffolk Council. The recommendation of paragraph 2.1 is, quote, pursuant to section 74 Local Government Act 1972 as amended, to change the name of the district from Babergh to South Suffolk from the 1st of April 2020, end of quotation. However, a report in the East Anglian Daily Times on Tuesday 15th October, page 4, states that, quote, the council's leaders have opted to cancel the meeting and push back the debate to give councillors more time to consider it, end of quotation. In the light of the above, please, 1, name the councillors who, quote, considered it relevant and timely to now replace the name of Babergh with South Suffolk, quotation from the report at paragraph 3.5, and identify the meeting or meetings at which the decision to propose the name change was made, stating where the minutes or record of such meeting or meetings can be accessed. Secondly, state how many representations respectively for and against the proposal have been received and where they can be accessed. And thirdly, state whether any detailed assessment was made of the financial costs of the proposed rebranding specific to this council and how it is proposed such costs will be financed.
Councillor Ward, please could you respond?
Thank you, Mr. Lamming, for your question. This, looking at part 1, first of all, this first question really concerns how policy ideas arise and get developed, and there are various informal mechanisms and forums for this prior to their being submitted formally to either Cabinet or Council as appropriate for debate and voting. Specifically in this case, I originally raised the idea during an informal Cabinet discussion during a workshop on the 22nd of July 2019. The topic of discussion was the future rebranding for Babergh and Mid-Suffolk councils. I therefore took the opportunity to initially sound out my Cabinet colleagues about the idea of changing the name of Babergh District Council. As this idea received, in principle, indicative support from the Cabinet, officers were tasked to draft a relevant report. As such a change requires 2/3 of councillors present at an extraordinary council meeting to approve it, the report has not been taken to any other committee. There are, of course, no minutes or records of the Cabinet's discussions at the workshop on 22nd of July 2019. Looking at the second part, we have received 8 formal responses, 5 of them from residents in parishes within Babergh, raising concerns about pronunciation, the proposed name, history, costs and consultation. An anonymised summary of these can be produced on request. One of these from a parish council wasn't against the proposal but wanted more information, and another missed the point entirely, thinking the proposal was to change the spelling of Babergh. I and other members have received a few emails as well. I have also had a mix of positive and negative comments from my parish councils, about 50-50. Whilst we always consider feedback, this doesn't and cannot determine policy, as it inevitably only comes from a small number of residents, and it is usually only those who strongly oppose something who contact us. I will say at this point that the comments in the responses received, and also in the media concerning costs and history, have come from people who clearly know little of either, and I've done the research for both of these. Looking at the third part, there is no more detailed financial assessment of the cost beyond what is contained in the original report, but based on experience elsewhere, it can be kept very low. We are in contact with and learning from authorities who have done this. We will not change things that do not need changing immediately, and only do it as things reach the end of life and need replacing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr Lamming, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, please. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ward, for your answer. Would you, in fact, not consider that the public ought to have been formally consulted before proposing such a name change? And in view of your answer to part 3, where you say we will not change things that don't need changing immediately and only do it as things reach end of life and need replacing, that in the light of that, would you accept that there will be no need to change the name of this council unless and until it is involved in some form of local government reorganisation involving another council?
Councillor Ward.
To answer the first part, in terms of public consultation, we here, the members here are representatives of the public, and they can consult through their local ward member. As to the second part, local government reorganisation is not something that's currently under consideration within the county, and it would require the cooperation of other districts and also the county council itself.
Mr Lamming, I believe you have a second question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, second question for the Chairman of the Council's Planning Committee. The question is this: what were the costs, A, incurred by the Council, and B, ordered to be paid by the Council to the claimant in the following legal cases? Firstly, the successful judicial review challenged by Mr Clive Gare to the grant of planning permission by the Council on the 7th of February 2018 against the advice of its officers for a housing development in the village of Hartest. The grant of permission being quashed by the High Court by a consent order made on the 15th of June 2018 on the basis of the Council's concession made on the face of the order that it had failed to supply adequate reasons. And secondly, the second successful challenge by Mr Gare, and here the judgment is reported under the name Queen on the application of Gare against Babergh District Council 2019 EWHC 2041 admin. The successful challenge by Mr Gare in that case was a subsequent grant of planning permission by the Council on the 18th of December 2018, again against the advice of its officers, for the said development, judgment given on the 26th of July 2019. The basis for quashing the permission, again, being the Council's failure to give reasons for its decision and, quote, failure to determine whether or not and the extent to which the development proposal complied with the development plan.
Councillor Beer, please can you respond?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your question, Councillor Lemon. The Council's full in-house costs are not possible to quantify. Whilst we could provide details of the number of officer hours spent on the matter for our in-house legal team, the time spent by our planning team is not recorded. And the reality is that the officers involved would have been employed by the Council in any event. If not doing the work on these claims, officers would have been working on other Council businesses. In terms of advice and representation by Council, we incurred £3,700 costs, net of VAT, in relation to Claim 1 of June 2018, and £13,450, net of VAT, in relation to Claim 2 of July 2019. Our own incidentals travel to court for Claim little 2 amounted to £294.70. The Council was ordered to pay to the claimant costs of £12,141.88 in relation to Claim 1 and to £30,000 in relation to Claim 2. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr Lamming, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please. My comment, first of all, was I retired from the bar too early. My question is this. While it's entirely proper for the Planning Committee in an appropriate case to make a decision contrary to the advice of its officers, and indeed often members of the public from the local area wish it to do so, what lesson, however, has the Planning Committee learned from this costly exercise? And the figures that Mr Beer has just given amount to just under £60,000. And what steps have been or are being taken to seek to ensure that such a reasons challenge against a council decision cannot succeed in future?
Thank you, Mr Lamming. Councillor Beer, do you wish to respond?
Thank you. Well, yes, I think I can respond to that, Mr Lamming. Certainly, I think my Planning Committee members take it very serious when planning applications come in front of them, and they are well aware that costs can go considerably high, but they are duty-bound to weigh it up in the best way they feel they should do. And I would hope the lesson that is learnt by my fellow Planning Committee members, and perhaps to all members of the Council, is that be sure that you've got it correct, that you know what you're voting on, and that you can have the evidence to justify your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. We'll now move on to item 7, questions by councillors in accordance with Council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Thank you. Item 8, BC 1923, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Report. I'd like to invite Councillor McCraw to introduce his report, which is for noting. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. The Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee met on the 19th of September. The report is in front of you. I won't go through it. There are 3 main items we dealt with: Community Infrastructure Levy, the Expenditure Framework Review. This is the second year we've been examining this, more or less looking at how the framework is developing in conjunction with both the SIL team and the member review panel. I think the primary exercise or primary part that you can take from that report is that the nature of SIL bids is changing. And if that is something I would draw members' particular attention to. But we thoroughly endorse the work of both the team and the joint member panel. Second item was one that was brought up at fairly short notice in discussing the waste collection route changes, which obviously received a great deal of attention and some somewhat selective use of statistics in the press. In fact, when we actually examined the figures, the rate of missed collections, even at its very worst, was still less than 1%. It has since fallen. So those criticisms, there were problems in certain areas, and fundamentally the lesson here was that if your bin was collected, it was 100% successful. If your bin was not collected, it was 100% failure. We thought that the process had been carried out fairly and reasonably, and we asked for lessons to be learnt in any future projects involving such a change in any of our council activities. And the final item we looked at was an information bulletin on the impact and implementation of universal credit on our own income management within our housing services. Fundamentally, this is something we've been examining progressively. At the moment, we can see that the housing team have it well under control, as much as it is possible for something that's not within our control to be under control. Happy to take any questions on the report and our future work plans, either within this meeting or afterwards.
Any questions to Councillor McCraw? Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Right, we'll now move on to item 9, BC 1924, Corporate Plan 2019 to 2027. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 1924 and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. As colleagues on the Cabinet are aware, we have been working on a cross-party basis with our Cabinet colleagues at Mid-Suffolk to review the existing joint strategic plan before it expires in 2020. This work and the principles we have developed to guide the evolution of the corporate plan are set out in Appendix A of your report. The senior leadership team has been supporting us in this work, and it has also been significantly informed by officers from across both councils. I'm therefore really proud to now be presenting this new joint corporate plan 2019 to 2027 on behalf of the Cabinet for full council approval. Of course, the nature and role of district councils has not fundamentally changed. The new corporate plan therefore reflects more of an evolution rather than a revolution. It does, however, provide a more stretching joint vision for the future of our areas, and it is designed to enable us to address the challenges and seize the opportunities facing our districts and our councils for the foreseeable future. The revised vision and the new mission statement will ensure that we provide more confident leadership of our places through greater place-based working. Our interconnected strategic priorities are now firmly enshrined as being the environment, our economy, housing, well-being, our customers, and finally our communities. Finally, by embedding our new adopted values within the corporate plan, we are more deeply rooting our organisation in what we believe in, genuinely caring about our residents and places, and getting stuff done for people. A visualisation of the revised corporate plan is contained within the report, but I have asked that the Chief Executive provides a more detailed PowerPoint presentation, which he will do once the motion has been moved and seconded. I therefore take great pleasure in moving the recommendation at paragraph 3.1, the Council adopts the draft corporate plan 2019 to 2027 to Council as visually represented in paragraph 4.5 to replace the refreshed joint strategic plan 2016 to 2020. And may I have a seconder?
Councillor Arcey, did you want to say anything? No. Thank you. So we'll now move on to questions and debate. Presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, members. As the leader has already set out the key points, I'm just going to try and take you through a little bit of the detail, as the leader said, a bit more of a detailed summary. I'll warn you now, there are 22 slides to this detailed summary and a short film, but bear with me. You should all have in front of you a hard copy of that, conscious that you won't be able to see on the screen the exact wording, and so we've produced you a larger hard copy, although for those of you working on your tablets, you can, of course, zoom in on those as well if you prefer. So to take you through, what I'm largely going to talk you through is Appendix A to the report, and then specifically through the diagrams. But firstly, taking you through what is Appendix A. So this document replaces, as you've heard, the previous Joint Strategic Plan. That's a document that runs to some 30 pages and that we've had both a refreshed version and then the original version for a number of years now. And I'll take you through some of the principles that sit behind that. But the new version contains more. It's a lot shorter, it's only one diagram, but it contains more than those original 30 pages did. In particular, what I wanted to do at the outset is just set out what we mean by vision, mission, values and strategy, because you're going to see those four words a lot, or you're going to hear those four words a lot. So by vision, specifically what we're talking about there is describing the world that we want to see for Babergh and for Mid Suffolk, this being a joint plan. The mission, therefore, is then an extension of that. So it's not the vision, it's not the world we want to see, but it's specifically the role that this council plays in making that vision become a reality. And if I just pause at that stage, that mission statement, that concept of a mission, isn't something that was contained within the previous incarnation of the Joint Strategic Plan, the corporate plan, and was a significant gap, in my opinion, because what it meant was you had a vision statement. In fact, you had two. You had one for Babergh and one for Mid Suffolk, but you had no roadmap, particularly for officers, but also for councillors, to show what role we play in actually delivering that vision. You just simply had a very broad, overarching statement. So the mission helps describe how we will go about making that vision a reality. We then have values that set out the motivation behind that vision, the heart, as you see there, behind the mission, and describe what drives us as people, as individuals, but as organisations. So describing those culture and those values that sit behind us, including our behaviours. And then finally, specific strategies, the tactics, if you like, as to not what we're going to do, but how do we intend to go forth and make these things a reality. So those four words you're going to see appearing a number of times, but I thought it was useful to set those out. And as I say, compared to the previous incarnation, the previous version had two visions, not one, and it did have mention of strategies, but it had no mission, and critically, it also had no values. And so those are the changes in a nutshell that have come forward through the revised corporate plan. So just touching briefly on the values, these aren't new. Hopefully they're not new to you. They've been in place since the start of the year, so I'm not going to spend much time talking about them in detail. That's probably useful to do at a different session. But as you know, hopefully, we have those 5 values in place. They're hanging around my neck through the lanyard that I've got, and we're on a constant process of embedding those values into everything that we do as an organisation. Similarly, many of the strategies are already in place. So we already have a leisure, sport and physical activity strategy that was adopted back in autumn 2017, an economic strategy, more commonly known as Open for Business, customer strategy, a community strategy, a homes and housing strategy, and an emerging environment strategy. That's not one that's currently in place, but that's one that the new task force is working on, and some work began even before you adopted the climate change emergency. Work began on this prior to the elections as well. You can see there the dates that each have been adopted. The key thing I wanted to just highlight in relation to those 6 strategies, and I'll come back to them again later, is the environment one, as I say, is very much a work in progress. That isn't there yet. So what you're seeing when you see the corporate plan is not a finished piece of work, but the start of further work. The economic strategy, your Assistant Director, Fiona, wishes to revisit that. That's, as you saw earlier, a couple of years old now, and so she will be revisiting that with the Cabinet members in due course, during the course of the year, to make sure that we have the most relevant economic strategy for what are constantly changing economic times. And then lastly, just to mention in terms of this slide, you'll have seen, if I just flick back briefly, you'll have seen we've got in place a leisure, sport and physical activity strategy, very much a sport strategy. What we don't have is a health and well-being strategy, and we have the aspiration to turn that from just being about sport to being all things health and well-being, much in the same way that everything that we commission is also about health and well-being as well. So in terms of the strategies, whilst many are in place, they're on a journey as well, and you will see that these start to evolve further, particularly those 3, over the course of the next 12 months. The key thing I would say about strategies, if I just focus on this ever so slightly, and if I use an analogy, if I use a football analogy, which is dangerous for me, I know very little about football, but if you think about football, the team, whichever team you choose to support, will change its tactics on a weekly basis, possibly during the game, depending upon who they're playing against. Local government has a habit of adopting strategies and leaving them in place for 4, 5, 6, 7 years as the world changes around us and our tactics don't change. So my anticipation is that whilst we should have these in place, these should be much more lively, live documents that are constantly kept under review as to is the tactic working, and if it's not, then obviously changing accordingly. Moving on to the meat then, what I wanted to focus on is the vision, as I say, the world we want to see and our part in making that become a reality. And through the Cabinet, in conjunction with their colleagues, as the leader has said, at Mid-Suffolk, we've been working prior to the election and subsequently to develop the concepts that you'll see set out within Appendix A. So what's important to achieve through having a revised corporate plan? And first and foremost, having a single, and that's critical, because as I've said already, previously we had a joint vision. Makes life very difficult when you've got that subtly joint vision, but they were only subtly different. Clear and compelling vision that inspires common purpose, and I'll revisit the vision in a moment again. That it should reflect Babergh and Mid-Suffolk as places. This shouldn't be a corporate plan that you can cut and paste and apply to any other rural district elsewhere in England. It should be as relevant as we can possibly make it to our districts, recognising, of course, that district councils and borough councils tend to provide the same services, so you would expect to some degree of generality. That there should be a golden thread, and again, if I use the slightly hackneyed now anecdote you may have heard previously, man walks into NASA, sees a cleaner sweeping the floor, asks him what he does for a living, and that man says, "I'm putting a man on the moon." That principle should apply to everything that we do as well. There should be that golden thread all the way through from the vision to every single individual officer's one-to-ones, appraisals, their objectives on an annual basis. It's not just about providing a high-level vision, it's about making that connection to absolutely everything that we do. That it should be a longer-term plan. By its very nature, it's not something you're going to want to keep chopping and changing all the time, but we are, of course, an electoral body. We do have elections every 4 years, and so the recommendation is that it should be refreshed and reviewed just before and then immediately prior to each of our district council elections, and an eye cast across it as and when there's a general election as well, because that tends to result in a change in our environment, the broader environment within which we operate, and need to make sure again that our tactics are appropriate and that our corporate plan is appropriate to that changed world. And then lastly, in terms of this slide, and probably again it's quite significant in terms of the change, this corporate plan is unashamedly for you, for our stakeholders and for our staff. Apologies to Mr. Lamming at the back, it's not for the public in that regard. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be communicating with the public, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be making very clear what our vision is for our residents, for our taxpayers, but the document itself is about making us the efficient organisation that we need to be to deliver what you are looking for the future. Building further on what's important, the vision should feel beyond reach. That shouldn't simply be a case that you can stand on the doorstep, whichever political party you represent in 4 years' time, and be able to say, yes, we've achieved this, tick that box, aren't we great? No, the vision is deliberately, at the leaders and the Cabinet's request, something that should feel constantly that little bit out of reach, should be a stretch for us in that regard. But more broadly, the vision, in a nutshell, is about improving quality of life. I would argue that's what we exist for as local government, and particularly what we exist for as district councils. The plan clearly should align, and I will revisit this when we come to the image itself. The plan should align to our emerging local plan. There's no point having a local plan that sets out a blueprint for our districts for the next 18 years if our corporate plan is telling us something completely different. There clearly needs to be some alignment between the two. But as I mentioned already, we've moved from a 30-page document. The aspiration is to be a plan on a page, just the document, the diagram that you have in front of you, but supported by digital materials, hence the video that I'm going to play for you shortly. The plan will also then inform those strategies, so it's a symbiotic relationship between the strategies that I talked about, and again I'll talk about some other strategies shortly, and equally inform them as they emerge, so it should be constantly flowing back and forth. And as I said already, there should be multiple methods for communicating to the residents, to our public, to our taxpayers, to our customers, what our vision, mission and those strategic priorities are. Equally, Cabinet has considered what the plan should and not be. So it's all very well talking about what it should be, but equally what it shouldn't be. And so the proposal is that we shouldn't adopt a single approach as a district council. You may be familiar with other councils elsewhere in the country, the easy model, the easy council model, similar to EasyJet, where you get a basic service, but anything else you have to pay extra for. A commissioning council, which very much splits the council in half, so you have a commissioning function that decides what it wants, and then it commissions those services, often from other bits of the council, sometimes from elsewhere, and so on and so forth. The view is that no, we are a complicated and complex, sometimes chaotic organisation as local government, or body as local government, and therefore having a single model simply doesn't work. We need to be more flexible than that. Having said that, the corporate plan, should provide some boundaries as to what we aren't, not just say what we will do, but what we aren't. Shouldn't be style over substance, and shouldn't always include, or shouldn't include, try to include the context within which we operate, because that context moves very quickly. And as I've said already, the intention is that the corporate plan, should be here with us for a longer period of time. In developing it, we've also focused, and you'll see mention in a moment, of various sessions with officers. And so we've engaged with, I believe, if I just flick forward, 106 staff over the course of a series of events during the course of this year. And whilst this is looking at what we should be for the future, that's very much what the corporate plan is about, it's also recognising we shouldn't lose what makes us great already. And so you'll see here the suggestions, the views of our staff, echoed by our Cabinet Councillor colleagues, as to what's important about what we already do. This is building on what we already do. This is, if you like, an evolution rather than a revolution in that regard. So caring for our districts, our sense of duty, the friendliness and welcomingness approach, being greater than the sum of our parts, the richness and strength and authenticity of our relationships, our local knowledge of our places, our essential links to our communities, how we are seen to value those communities and being custodians for them and improving our places whilst protecting their character and strengths, are all things that staff say are critically important and that we do already. Doesn't mean we can't do more of, but that we do already, and therefore should be preserved as part of the development of this new corporate plan. So as I said already, that's come through staff, that's come through the extended leadership team, the senior leadership team, and then through joint cabinet discussions with Mid-Suffolk Cabinet as well. But in a nutshell, that the corporate plan should be about quality of life, that overarches everything. It's about ambition and aspiration, prosperity and valuing our places, and reflecting, and I would argue respecting, the historical qualities that make up our places as well. So if I take you now onto the actual diagram itself, and you need to think of this a bit like a dartboard. So we're starting from the middle and working outwards. That's the best way of trying to visualise this. And so I focus first and foremost on the vision. So through all of that work, that's culminated in this vision statement, building great communities with bright and healthy futures that everyone is proud to call home. That's the vision, the world we want to see. Supported by the mission, as I said, how we'll go about creating that as Babergh District Council. So we'll provide strong, proud, inspirational leadership, striving for excellence, and together building great communities for everyone to live, work, visit, and invest in. So that's the vision and mission at the centre of everything that we're trying to achieve. And then supported around that, as I said already, is the local plan. So apologies to planning colleagues if they're in the room. Sometimes the local plan can be seen as a planning document. My view is it is not, or it is as also a planning document. More fundamentally, as I said already, it's the blueprint for our districts for the next 18 years. It sets out what our places should look like for the next 18 years, and therefore it should be at the centre of that diagram, supporting the vision and the mission. That's why you see it slap bang in the middle. As we then spread out through the diagram, there are 6 strategic priorities, each of which underpinned by a strategy itself. And I've mentioned those strategies itself already, but those are strategic priorities for us. They're not rocket science. They won't come as a surprise to you, but just to run through them. So the environment, communities, well-being, customers, housing, and economy. They are deliberately drawn that way in a circle because they all relate to one another. We can't do something in the economy without thinking about the environment and our communities. We can't do something in relation to well-being without thinking what that might mean in terms of housing and communities, and so on and so forth. So they are of equal weight in this model. No one is more important or less important than the others in that regard. What's proposed is that they should be seen as a whole as 6 strategic priorities. None of this happens, though, without people. It's all very well talking about documents, it's all very well having pretty pictures and models, but ultimately we're a people business within local government. Nothing happens without all of you as our councillors, but also not without all of our staff, and then with our public as well. So those things that look a little bit like paw prints, they're supposed to look like people, are a reflection of where our people sit in amongst the entirety of this corporate plan. And then also, and I've mentioned them already, our values that wrap all the way around the outside of everything that we do, driving what we're doing in terms of how we go about approaching things. It's not just what we do day to day, but it's how we go about doing it in terms of our culture, in terms of our behaviours and our engagement with all these components. And then lastly, in terms of the diagram, and I won't read them out because you've got them in front of you, but in terms of joining up that golden thread, as I said already, you'll see there bottom right-hand side in the light green, appraisals and one-to-ones. That's the link all the way back to every single thing that every single officer is doing within the organisation, and next to it, within the sort of lighter blue, the people strategy as well. But there are nuts and bolts, the organisational strategies that we have to have, the medium-term financial strategy, the asset strategy, and so on and so forth, that form part and parcel of making sure that we're a solid organisation, able to deliver the things that you want us to deliver. So that's the corporate plan in a nutshell. I do have a short film. The film isn't specifically for the corporate plan. It was produced as part of our wider materials, both for recruitment and for our staff conference earlier in the year, but it's relevant, and you'll see it's a good example of the type of digital material that will go alongside essentially what is a one-page diagram. So if I just play that briefly for you.
From first light, we start working.
Babergh and Mid-Suffolk are really great places with fantastic, bright futures. But what's even more important and what makes them fantastic are the people. The residents and the tenants that we work for, our councillors who volunteer their time to our communities, and all of our staff who are incredibly proud and passionate and care about their communities and making them even better for the future.
Everyone deserves a safe, warm home. We're working hard to build new homes and create settled communities to help our residents live happy and healthy lives. We've helped thousands of families with our Homes to Let scheme and helped return over 300 previously empty homes back into use.
We're working to make Babergh and Mid-Suffolk communities healthier, happier and safer places to live. We've committed millions of pounds to replace and refurbish much-loved community assets such as village halls, community centres, play areas and sports facilities. Through funding advice and grants, we support hundreds of projects like this new skate park in Sudbury so that communities can revitalise their local area.
Keeping Babergh and Mid-Suffolk clean and litter-free is really important to us. Our teams and lots of volunteers go out and collect thousands of tonnes of waste and recycling every year.
Customers come first for us, that's the bottom line. Our customer service staff know Babergh and Mid-Suffolk really well. We've created new service points across our district with thousands of visitors.
One of our most important jobs is securing the right type of house in the right place. It's not just about new homes. We're helping local businesses set up with the right facilities in the right places. This creates jobs for our residents and supports our economy.
This is how we're helping
to make Babergh and Mid-Suffolk
great places
that people want to call home.
At the end of the day, we're all about preserving what's fantastic in Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, making bright futures for all of our residents and ensuring that everyone is proud to call us home. One more slide. You'll be pleased that I'm not going to play all of those. So I've got one more slide, which hopefully will come up, technology willing. There we go. So just in terms of the video, that video was produced during the course, early part of the summer, but clearly was informed by some of this work. So you'll notice some of the commonality in terms of the language. The critical thing for me in relation to that production, as it were, that piece of material, is you're not in it, and you should be. But you're not in it because we haven't yet agreed, or you haven't yet approved the corporate plan. So once that's done, then clearly we would produce similar digital materials that would incorporate all of our councillors in it as well. Hopefully that was already familiar to you. You may well have seen some of it because it's been playing on the screens in Endeavour House for a number of weeks now, if not months. So hopefully it wasn't a shock to see that there. Lastly, from me, and last of my slides, is just to talk about what comes next. That's not wishing to predetermine your decisions tonight, but if you do approve the corporate plan, and if Mid Suffolk does approve the corporate plan on Thursday, then the next immediate step is the top of that diagram. You can see there corporate outcomes 2019 to 2023. Effectively, I've kind of loosely called that the senior leadership team service plan. So alongside every other service plan that we have for each of the different services within the organisation, there are some clear corporate outcomes that we would wish to adopt for that 4-year window, and the proposal is that they will come through to Cabinet for the next available Cabinet meeting, but clearly they can't come through until the corporate plan itself, the overarching document, has been considered and approved. And I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you to our Chief Executive for that presentation. I'd now like to open this up to questions and debate. Would anyone like to start? Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm quite impressed actually, and I particularly liked the line about quality of life for our residents. I think that's really important and should be at the heart of what a council should be about. My worry, and I'm sorry, I normally like to share these things in advance, but it's only really occurred to me as we were going through the presentation, is the use of the word customer and not the use of the word citizen. Because we're not a corporate body, or we're not just a corporate body. Some things we do are corporate, but at the heart of what we do, there has to be civic pride, a public service ethos. We're a public sector body, and as you rightly said, our core mission is to improve the quality of life for our citizens or our residents, not our customers. Because as soon as you use the word customers, you're getting into that mindset where we're trying to get some money out of them. And I feel that could be a mistake when we're trying to generate a sense of civic pride, a public service ethos in what is a public sector body with publicly elected representatives. So I guess I'm saying if we can change that word to citizens, I'll happily approve it. But as it stands, I'm not sure I will actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
I'm pleased, Councillor Lindsay, that you are in favour generally of the corporate plan. I'm concerned that you're going to withhold your support just based on that one word. Citizens, residents, customers. I think using the word customer does actually say something. It shows that, yes, we are a public service body and there is the public service ethos, but nonetheless, we have to start thinking about how we can incorporate private sector concepts of delivering service to customers, customer satisfaction. And I think in that context, the use of the word customer is valid here. I don't mind the word resident. I do have a bit of an objection to citizen, perhaps. But nonetheless, I think customer is right because it says a lot about what we're trying to achieve and the way we want to achieve it.
Councillor Marvesi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I share Councillor Ward's opinion. I think we should talk of customers because what we're about is the exchange of mutual values to mutual satisfaction. So once we get that concept, then we'll start to deliver. But the other thing I wanted to mention, Madam Chairman, is to say thank you to everyone for putting the environment in the infograph, but also to moving it up the agenda, because our attitude to the environment moving forward will affect our economy and will affect the quality of life. So I'd like to say thank you for moving it up the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marvesi. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to say that we shouldn't be afraid of the word customer, because we're not just talking about our communities. We're talking about the organisation as a whole, and all of us are customers. And if we're talking about customers, the connotation is service. And how well do we service everybody within our organisation? So that's our communities, that's us as councillors, what is our relationship with our offices and our agents as well. One of the big drivers for me as portfolio holder behind the whole customer portfolio is our culture around how we deliver to our communities and how we are perceived. And at the moment, that stock, I think reasonably we could say, is fairly low. So we have to drive that up. We have to make that better. We must not get bogged down with simple phrases. If we keep that in mind, we're talking about customers, service, how much better can we do for everybody that engages with us. So I'm quite comfortable there. I'm quite comfortable as it is, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I'm pretty much happy to endorse what has just been said about the word customer. I certainly prefer it to the word citizen, which to me has a very much George Orwell 1984 feel about it. We're here to serve our communities, our residents, our people, our customers, the broad range. This vision does that. It encompasses as much as we can, so I'm more than happy to support this.
Councillor Hurren.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Unlike Arthur, I do have a great love of football, and I can do soccer analogies all night long. And Arthur, haven't had the team talk, which sounds very good. Are you confident that we can deliver? I will support the plan, but I do have some very grave misgivings about our performance already. And it's all right making promises for apple pie, but given that some of what you talk about is statutory duties anyway, I would hope that in the future, if a community comes to you with reports of illegal planning in an area of outstanding natural beauty, continuous, extensive environmental breaches, and many other things, that the team will deliver and not continue to leak very big own goals. I think there's some people in this room know what I'm talking about, and I think before we start playing pretty football, we ought to get the defence correct to start with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hurren. Are there any other comments? So, yes. Councillor Ward, have you anything else you'd like to add?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. In that case, all those in favour? That's carried. Anyone against? Thank you. One against. Thank you. That's carried. Item 10, BC 1924, Political Balance and Composition of Committees. I'd like to invite Jan Robertson, Deputy Monitoring Officer, to introduce paper BC 1924. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Members are asked to approve the revised political balance and composition of committees for the Council as a result of the recent decision by Councillors Ayres and Maybury to join the independent group. This will ensure that the Council meets its legal obligations under the Local Government and Housing Act 1989. Thank you.
Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ward. And a seconder? Councillor Arthey. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. Unanimous, I think. Now we'll move on to item 11, election of a Vice Chair for Overview and Scrutiny Committee. May I have nominations for the Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee? Are you proposing, Councillor Ward?
Yes, I'd like to propose Councillor Adrian Osborne for the role of Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Adrian has served on the committee for some time now and would be a very able person to take over that role.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Did you want to say anything? Thank you. Any other nominations? Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Appointments. Are there any changes?
Chairman, on a point of order, I don't know if that was carried unanimously.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Can we go back to that then? Were there any against in that last item, please? Any abstentions? Two abstentions. Okay. Could we have those? Could we have those noted, please? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Beer. Right, we'll move on to item 12 then, Councillor Appointments. So are there any changes to those already tabled in item 10? No. Understand not. So those in favour?
No, we don't need to vote.
We don't need to do that. Right, fine. Okay, we'll move on to the motion on notice, item 13. So, sorry, is that?
Yeah, just ask me to speak. Yeah.
Right. I'd like the Deputy Monitoring Officer to say a few words. Thank you.
Members, before we commence a debate on the motion, I'd just like to point out that this relates to a cabinet function. Therefore, once this has been duly moved, seconded and debated, this will be referred to Cabinet for decision. The comments from this debate will be referred to Cabinet for them to take into account when considering the motion as per Part 3, 14.7 of the Constitution. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Councillor Beer to move the motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, you all have the motion in front of you. You don't wish me to read that all out, or do you? No. Right. Then that's in front of you. I'd just like to propose that and speak now, or do... right. Members, this motion will give us, as members, the opportunity to get involved and to call on the public to come up with suggestions and solutions as how we should go forward. I may be a voice or friend of the motorist, that's fine, but we also need to hear the voice of the Green Agenda and other road users and safety organisations. There are, as we know, many problems in our major town of Sudbury. After long delays, the removal of parking spaces in Cross Street will very soon be underway and will help improve the air quality for residents of Cross Street. As a result of growth and visitors in the future, our car parks are quite often full, and that may mean that this means that we may just need better minor works, such as line markings, time limits, or residence parking permits. We should not rule in or out at looking
at a multi-storey car park or new improved car parks or other ideas throughout the district. We will be losing parking spaces if we get the remodelling of the Market Hill, the bus stops, and civil parking enforcement, which could force more cars to park in our side streets and cause residential and environmental problems there. Growth and visitors happen also in other parts of the Babergh District because we are open for business, that's our slogan. Hadley may be coping at the moment, but with the increased development happening in and around Hadley, there may be a need to identify new parking areas or other solutions. Our tourist areas, Long Melford, Lavenham, as well as other areas, perhaps needs to be looked at to see how we can improve car parking and the flow and traffic flows in our small villages and communities. Members, we need to have a fresh new approach and clear open minds to investigate this. I'd like the Cabinet to take action as soon as possible and set up a small group to report back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. Could I have a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Newman, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I'll just say I'll be pleased to second this and I reserve the right to speak later.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to move an amendment to that motion. Is now the right time to do it? Should I just speak to it?
Yes, you can.
Sure, yeah. I mean, thank you for bringing this, and I agree with everything you said in your introductory moving the motion there. We do need a review of parking. My only problem with the original motion is there's a couple of assumptions there that the answer is more parking. So the words extra capacity. So I've taken the word extra out and put what level of capacity will be needed, because it swings and roundabouts. We can't look at car drivers in isolation. And we've had, this I've shared with our members, this study from 2011. People said, oh, it's all out of date. Well, we need to revive it, because what it recommends in there, it looks at the actual figures, and we need to look at that. But if you just take Sudbury on alone, which is probably, I think Councillor Beer would agree, is probably where the biggest parking issues are, perhaps. They make the point that there are, if you look at the people that are driving in Sudbury, 43% of them are driving to work already live within Sudbury and Cornard. So they're driving less than 2 kilometres. That's 1.25 miles, if you want it in old money. So they don't need to actually drive. There isn't a need for parking spaces for those people. There's a need to encourage them to use other forms of transport, like the old feet, like a bicycle, even like a bus. And we need to look at ways to fund buses and those other bits of infrastructure. It's not just about parking. So hence I put to review car and cycle parking, because there's also an even worse shortage of cycle parking. If you look at the provision at the station in Sudbury, it's appalling. It's long. It was identified in 2011 as a problem. Nothing's been done about it. And the other amendment I put in is that the thing we need to consider is the change to electric vehicles, and there's going to be a need not just for parking spaces but for charging points for those vehicles as well. So I urge you to accept this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. Have you got a seconder? Councillor McCraw, thank you. Did you want to say anything, Councillor McCraw?
I'll reserve the right to speak later.
Thank you. So, Councillor Beer, do you accept this amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we're going to agree on this, but I do think you're playing with words with the extra.
because I do think there will be extra demand if all these other factors happen. I apologise for not adding in cycling, a cycle provision. I did think about it, but I did think, well, the only cycling that I'm likely to do will be on an electric bicycle. But I take that point. Certainly adding in the uptake in the use of electric vehicles, yes, I should have thought of that one, and I accept that quite happily. I'm just a little bit concerned with the word extra, because there will be extra demands because of other things we're doing. But, I don't know whether you particularly want to remove that word. I would like it to stay, but the other 2 points I'm more than happy to take on board.
Councillor Lindsay, please could you reply to this question?
Sure, yeah. I would like to remove that word extra, because I think it goes to the heart of the issue here. There's an assumption in this motion that more houses automatically means we have to provide more parking for them. And I think we shouldn't, if we're doing a review of parking, we shouldn't go into that review with that assumption. We need to think about how we can encourage a shift from people out of cars into a sustainable transport. So I'm sorry, I want to keep the extra.
Councillor Beer, you need to decide now whether you would like to accept the amendment or not.
Well, I'm looking around the room and I see my friends opposite and my friends behind me and beside me. I'm quite sure I'll be proven right that we will need extra, but I will remove that word so that we can move forward, provided my seconder accepts it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. So now we'll open it up
Just
to...
ask Councillor Newman if he accepts it.
Councillor Newman, do you accept this amendment too?
I'll be pleased to accept it as well.
Right, so we just move to question and debate now.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. We'll now move on to discussion and debate. Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a lot of sympathy with Councillor Lindsay's desires to see a modal shift, particularly in those residents who live relatively close to our town centres. Indeed, I've spoken to Cassandra Clements here, and she is currently looking into the feasibility and costs associated with secure cycle storage in hopefully the Kingfisher car park in Sudbury. In terms of other encouragement, it does require us to work very closely with Suffolk County Council, because we are very much dependent upon them, particularly with regard to bus routes and also the provision of cycle lanes where they are appropriate and feasible. I also have a lot of sympathy with Councillor Beer's statement that he will be proven right in the end and that extra capacity will be needed. Quite simply, there's going to be a lot of development taking place in communities a long way from our major towns, and with the best will in the world, those people are going to want and need, rather, to drive to Sudbury, to Hadley. We don't want to discourage that, prevent them from doing so. We want them into those towns to support the businesses. We don't want them to go to Colchester, Bury or Ipswich. But also, the other last point I'd like to make is that, crucially, this isn't just about Sudbury and Hadley, and I know we've mentioned Lavenham, Long Melford, etc., but there are other places where we know that there are problems with parking. Pin Mill, the capacity at certain times of the year is limited, and the demand exceeds the capacity. And with the best will in the world, there won't be any alternative for people other than to drive to Pin Mill. We do have problems in villages such as Capel St Mary, and again, I can't see that a modal shift is going to seriously have an impact there. It does need extra parking provision in that village. And finally, of course, although Dedham is outside of district, the parking problems in Dedham are increasing year upon year, and they take place in Babergh, north of the river, alongside the road leading to Stratford St Mary. The county has put in double yellow lines. That restriction is very often flouted because there's no enforcement. But at some point, we are going to have to seriously consider some parking provision there for the tourists to Dedham. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Malvesi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There has been mention of Lavenham and Long Melford, both of which are very strong tourist destinations, and they earn quite a they make a big contribution to the economy of Babergh. One of the issues, like everybody else, parking is a problem. I can speak for Long Melford because I represent the ward. The Neighbourhood Plan Steering Committee conducted a survey, and top of the agenda was parking and the issue of cars in the village. It is a conservation area, so we are restricted, as is Suffolk County, with what they can do. Everybody's spoken of the different aspects, but one thing that we've ignored is the lack of consideration of drivers and the need to educate drivers to not be so selfish and to consider other people. And I think that with civil parking enforcement coming in the new year, hopefully these inconsiderate car owners, drivers, will be hit hard in the pocket, and they will then learn to park and to use their cars more sensibly. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor Malvesi. Councillor Creswell.
Being a Sudbury resident, I think the main thing at the moment is till you get your enforcement, the traffic sorted, you won't have a real idea how much traffic you're going to have in the town and how the car parks are used, because at the moment you've just got people parking wherever they want in the town. So until them issues are sorted out and you get your enforcement done, I don't really think how much extra parking you might need, because people park now, even if it's a 3-hour car park, they'll stay all day because there's no need to move. So that may change things altogether.
Thank you, Councillor Creswell. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think I'll speak a little bit about Hadley, of course, if I may. And I think for Hadley, for all of you that know it, it's certainly I believe it's got a special high street, and it's a high street which is continuously evolving and it is changing. And I certainly welcome this motion because I think certainly we need a review that is important and looks concurrently at civil parking enforcement and to measure the subsequent parking requirements within the town. And parking along the high street and the offshoots should be examined, how best to serve businesses as well as residents and visitors alike, including cyclists, of course. It's one of the many cafe stop-off points for Sunday cycle rides, so that's pretty important as well. There's many proposed developments and current developments in Hadley which, okay, we've debated, is that going to increase in traffic? It's likely it will, although we don't want it to. But I'm also conscious that Hadley's also going to be losing some parking capacity with the development of Corks Lane. So hence why it's important really to look at the future of Hadley High Street and the environs there. I think it's an ideal opportunity to align this review with Hadley's own vision for prosperity, and if it's implemented with maybe future high street funding monies, it has the potential for some great improvement for the benefits of businesses, residents and visitors alike. So I certainly I certainly support this motion, and I'd like to see certainly the town businesses, residents and the town council, of course, all involved in moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Jameson. Oh, wasn't it? Oh, so sorry.
I think, sorry, no, we're okay, it was me. I'd like to just raise an issue with something Councillor Ward mentioned, and he said some words to the effect of, with all the will in the world, the only alternative is to drive to Pin Mill. I live 6 miles away from Pin Mill, and I ride there relatively frequently on my bicycle. And what I would like is better cycling parking facilities at Pin Mill and in other places of interest around the district.
Thank you, Councillor Hardacre. Councillor Horan.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I would like to concur with what Councillor Malvesi said. The parking is appalling. In fact, we don't have parking anymore. We have abandonment in some cases. It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But I think we need look more towards the county for a steer, because everything at the moment is pushing people into their cars on the road. We have the disastrous school transport policy, which in my area will probably put no less than 20 more cars on the road. Now, I realise when they get to their destination, they won't use public car parks, but they certainly will park where they can. In the case of Boxford School, they park now up to the bypass. Now, I know it's not strictly what we're talking about tonight, but it is all part of the same problem. And also the cut in bus services also sending more people into the car. Some people cannot drive for various reasons, but those that can, until they have to give up use of the car, take it all the more. And we are creating a car society, possibly a bit to what we were talking about earlier. We should be trying to create a car-less society in many cases, and it is possible, but we have to be alert to the changes that are not helping our cause in any way at all.
Thank you, Councillor Horan. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Ward Councillor for Pinmill, I would like to echo what Councillor Hardacre here has said. It is difficult to park at Pinmill, if not impossible at times. I was very pleased that Councillor Ward actually brought the Shotley Peninsula into the debate, because sometimes we can feel a little bit isolated at that end of Babergh. But it is also a wonderful example of how people do think creatively and do think outside the box. Those of us who live not many miles from Pinmill can't take our cars down there and park. So we do walk, we do cycle, we do car share, we do think creatively, because who wouldn't want to arrive at the Button Oyster? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit disappointed by this, really, in the way that it started out. I think it's time that we've got to think about public transport. We've got huge amounts of potential development, and we know that if we allow that development to go ahead, our roads will become car parks, which is maybe what you're after, I don't know. But the roads are already a car park. If we allow 500 extra houses a year for the next 20 years, what are we going to be left with? And I'm sorry, Bryn, I think we shouldn't be waiting for the county council to come up with a solution to this. I think they've proved that they've failed quite considerably to deliver a solution on public transport. And I think it's time that the Babergh District and maybe Mid-Suffolk should grab this one and run with it. We've got to come up with a solution which delivers a better public transport system, whether it's buses, feet, or whether it's cycles. And this tends to imply that those three things aren't as important as finding car parking spaces. We've all got car parking problems. John mentioned Capel. You know, we've got potentially another 750 houses. Where will they park when they go to the shop? Well, maybe they'll have to walk. It doesn't mean we should provide car parking spaces. We've had parking problems in Pinewood since Suffolk 1 was built, what, 15 years ago. It doesn't mean that we should build a car park in Suffolk, in Pinewood. You know, maybe we should look at where these people come from and provide an alternative transport system. When that college was built, the County Council had a green transport policy. That was wonderful. It lasted 1 year. We've got to expect that people will use cars where they have to, but we've got to encourage them out of these cars. I'm surprised that you weren't more emphatic on that, quite frankly.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Councillor Jan Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I welcome this motion, in particular Cross Street. I'm glad to see that Babergh and County are now working together to deliver some solutions for that particular problem. They've suffered long enough in that particular street, so I really welcome that. I look forward to civil parking enforcement being introduced, but at the same token, I do appreciate that it will solve some problems, but it will create some new ones. So it will need some creative thinking from the Cabinet members working together with Suffolk to come up with some solutions on how we can deliver better Public transport, for example, as David Busby has referred to. Cycling routes, although I do have to say, I don't think I'd fancy cycling through Sudbury at the moment unless I've got a high insurance policy, which I'm sure Adrian would be glad about. But we would need to look at that level of traffic before you could put some cycle routes in there. I won't cover our rural areas, but we do need, because Councillor Ward has already covered that, we do need to bear in mind that, yes, we do have parking problems in Sudbury and in Hadley, but also our rural locations are also suffering from this. So I really welcome this, and I look forward to some really creative thinking coming forward on how these issues can be resolved and we can move on. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just because I was seconding the amendment, I'm not sure where we are because it's the amendment's been accepted. So it's a substantive motion, in fact. So we'll just get straight to the point. And the reason I'm really in support of the amendment, and I'm glad it's been accepted, is because I note from the original resolution, original motion, that we have recently closed down parking spaces to improve pollution and improve the traffic flow. Now, we've been just recently adopted and launched a raft of environmental strategies and policies, and it seems a little bizarre, having just closed down some parking spaces for good, solid environmental and health reasons, that we automatically assume we have to add more. Now, I speak here as a lifelong non-driver, so I've had to use public transport. I creative use of cadging lifts, what is otherwise known as car sharing, and many members in the chamber will have had the opportunity to give me a lift at various times as I've begged from them to get me from A to B. But it makes more sense. We have not examined these possibilities enough. Every time we see a planning application, there's a transport plan produced which always says car sharing, they're going to be carpooling. I'd love to see it actually seriously applied and actually make, when planning applications come forward, make it a condition they actually do some carpooling. Because the major method I have of transport is the cycle that's been referred to by so many people, and as it's been referred to by Councillors Osborne and Osborne, Sudbury is not an easy place to cycle. I've cycled in every single part of Suffolk at some time or another, and Sudbury is my least favourite place. It's not just the road network, it's the volume of traffic. Anything we can do, because there's a safety aspect, there's no question about it. That in itself is a reason to be cutting down on the amount of road movements, road vehicle movements. Yes, electronic bikes. I think we'll all go that way one day. I'm certainly likely to sometime in the next 10 or 15, maybe 20 years. Hasn't happened yet.
20 years?
Hey, a man can dream. I know cyclists cycling very happily considerable distances in their 80s, and I have no fears of not being able to do that. The point I'm trying to make is that we need fewer car movements. That also implies, although it's not necessarily the case because this is an examination, but it implies that we should be considering the whole thing in toto. As has been mentioned, public transport, the use of buses, carpooling. We've got to be a little bit more creative. We started off talking about environmental health impacts. The recent study has shown that depression is related directly to vehicle pollution in specific areas. Peaks of certain times of day in critical areas in 7 or 8 English cities have been shown to be directly related to serious health problems and to the tune of actual depression. We have, and intelligence, actually. People's intelligence actually drops in the presence of traffic fumes. And make no mistake about it, it is traffic fumes. And as a cyclist, I can assure you I get more of them than most. Much nicer for people in their little metal boxes, but do think about that aspect as well. I don't want to go around with a face mask in Suffolk. So I support the amendment, but I also think we should just get on with it. And when it comes back for review, by the way, let's examine all the possibilities, not just what's in the motion.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Dawson.
Yes, I may add my support to this motion, but I wonder actually whether I should point out with this that whilst we're reviewing our parking provision, it's most unfortunate that Babergh have chosen with the planning application in Hadley to remove what will be 100 spaces which are currently not actually used. And this is something that obviously I was firmly against, because it's only going to make 450,000, and we do need the parking provision in Hadley. So I hope that that can be considered in this review. And secondly, as I've said before, I think the residential parking permits is an absolute must, because we have a situation in Hadley where it's completely now all the private roads off the main high street, everybody coming into work now, because they can't park where they used to at the end in the high street, are all parking in the high street so that shoppers can't get in. So I would very much like to see, when we look at the level of capacity here, actually what we're actually going to do about it. Are we going to make extra car parks? Are we going to do the residents' parking permits? And you know, actually get on with it, because we've been discussing it for 3 or 4 years now, that side of it.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Newman, did you want to speak? You had reserved the right to speak earlier.
Yes, please. Just a few words. Just remember, this is a review, so I ask all our fellow councillors to support this. And as Arthur would say, make it our mission to sort out parking.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Lindsay.
I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to speak, or can I sum up? I guess I'm the proposer of the substantive
as you
motion.
propose the amendment, you can now sum up your amendment.
I'm summing. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on a few points, I completely agree with my colleague here about we shouldn't wash our hands of responsibility for buses, just because at the moment the County Council happen to subsidise them, and they're now talking about withdrawing the subsidy from a lot of them. Ipswich runs its own bus company, and it finances it from parking fees in Ipswich. There's no reason why we can't look at that kind of thing as a solution. There's no reason why we, as an authority, can't take responsibility for providing public transport to people in towns like Sudbury and Hadley, where people are actually driving when they don't need to. And this is if you look at it that way, if we look at it as sustainable transport rather than just parking, it's a win-win-win for everybody. Because I see it as 3 groups of people. There's people who don't actually have access to a car or a van. And in Sudbury alone, Sudbury and Cornard, there's 2,250 families who do not have access to a car. So those are the people we should be rewarding for not clogging up our roads with cars, not taking up space with parking, not polluting. Then there are a group of people who maybe have to drive. I accept that. We'll never get to 0 cars. There are people who live in remote places who have to drive. But then there are a big section in the middle that can actually flex their behaviour, that can, if they just thought about it for a minute, they could cycle to Pinmill 5 miles. If you use an electric bike, that increases your range, so I highly recommend it. You could cycle to Pinmill in 5 miles without breaking into a sweat. So there's a win for those people, and in getting more exercise, getting out and about, not having to find a parking space. And there's a win for the people who insist on using their car, or have to use their car, because when they get to Sudbury or Hadley, there are more spaces for them. They're not having to fight for the spaces, because all those other people have switched to moving by foot or bus or cycle. And the 4th win, which nobody has mentioned, is we just passed the climate emergency a couple of months ago. We're supposed to be reducing our carbon emissions to 0 by 2030. It's an emergency. And why are we talking about increasing parking? It just doesn't make sense. So, thank you. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. Councillor Beer, do you have anything to add?
Well, just a couple of points. Somebody just whispered to me that we used to have lead in petrol, which I'm well aware of, and that we took that out and put in alcohol. And perhaps they were referring to some of the comments when you were saying about some of the difficulties going on. But anyway, that aside, park and fees, I didn't mention that, but Councillor Lindsley, you did. This motion isn't going to ask for any increase in parking charges or increases. It's just looking at all the other options. That is something that I firmly believe that the parking programme we've got in Sudbury and Hadley we should stick to at the moment. Whether that will be looked at a later date, but it's nothing to do with this motion. I think coming back to the real world, yes, what you outline might be what we all envisage should happen, but at the end of the day, people will get in their cars. If we have new housing estates or new developments, yes, they will get in their cars. There is no way that we can stop that, as much as even I would agree with you, would like to. It can't be done. So we do need to try and make sure that we can accommodate some of this parking and control it better. And yes, if we can encourage people to get on their bikes, to use public transport, and I won't get into that argument because that's County Council, then that is the right course of action. But to not pursue this and not to pursue it with a real figure, Madam Chairman, we need to make sure that we action this and we deliver something from it. Because at the end of the day, the public out there do expect us to. And your point of 2,000 people in Sudbury and Cornard without access to a car, the population of Sudbury and Great Cornard is 20,000. And that is a lot of people. And that's without the ones that come in from outside the area. So we really don't need any lectures about the population of Sudbury and Great Cornard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer.
Clarification?
No, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Beer. Thank you all councillors for your interesting comments. So the motion, as amended with your comments, tonight will be referred to the Cabinet for decision. Thank you all. We're now coming to the end of our meeting. Thank you all for attending. Please note the date of the next meeting is Tuesday 10th December 2019 at 5:30. The meeting closes at 7:01. Councillors, welcome to the extraordinary council meeting. As members are already aware, the only substantive item on the agenda has been withdrawn. Therefore, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.